The Zenith Trading Hub floated in the comfortable darkness of neutral space, like a glittering monument to bureaucratic overreach and commercial ambition. 17 species had contributed to its construction, which explained why the bathrooms were located in what most carbon-based life forms would consider enthusiastically wrong places, and why the food court offered delicacies that ranged from sublime to probable war crime. But the station worked, more or less, processing roughly 40,000 travelers per cycle through its maze of docking bays, customs checkpoints, and overpriced gift shops, selling the same generic "I visited Zenith Hub" merchandise in 17 different anatomical configurations. The security sector occupied the station's central ring, a sprawling complex of scanners, databases, and increasingly tired security personnel who had seen every conceivable attempt at smuggling, identity fraud, and creative visa violations. The technology was impressive, even by galactic standards. Every checkpoint featured quantum neural scanners capable of reading biological signatures down to the subatomic level, cross-referencing them against a database that contained approximately 9 billion entries, spanning 400 years of meticulous record-keeping. The Galactic Security Collective took enormous pride in this system, frequently reminding anyone who would listen that their database had a 99.97% accuracy rating and had prevented roughly 14,000 major incidents in the past decade alone. Chief Security Officer Vex'thor commanded this digital fortress with the weary competence of someone who had spent 30 years watching the galaxy's various species lie, cheat, and occasionally attempt to smuggle live explosives in their digestive tracts. He was Catharian, which meant he stood roughly 8 feet tall, possessed 4 arms that he used primarily for the deeply satisfying act of crossing them disapprovingly, and had compound eyes that could simultaneously watch 12 different security feeds, while also judging your life choices. His exoskeleton was a dignified shade of deep blue, marked with the silver chevrons of his rank and a small coffee stain from breakfast that he hadn't noticed yet. The morning shift had been blessedly uneventful. A merchant vessel had arrived carrying entirely legal textiles that were, in fact, entirely legal textiles and not a clever smuggling operation. A family of Quellan tourists had been confused but cooperative about the weapons policies, surrendering their ceremonial plasma rifles, without the usual cultural pride speeches. A diplomat had thrown the expected tantrum about not receiving priority processing, which Vex'thor had handled by smiling politely and doing absolutely nothing to expedite the process. Standard operations. Beautiful, boring, standard operations. At Checkpoint 7, scan technician Krill was experiencing what he would later describe as the last moment of my professional innocence. Krill was Mytharian, a species known for their exceptional attention to detail, their 7-fingered hands perfect for operating complex machinery, and their unfortunate tendency to become anxious about literally everything. He had worked security for 6 years and had developed a comfortable routine. Scan the passenger, verify the biosignature against the database, check for contraband, wave them through. Repeat approximately 400 times per shift until his brain felt like lukewarm soup. The human approached his checkpoint with the particular gait of someone who had spent too long in varying gravity environments and had stopped caring about walking correctly in any of them. He was tall by human standards, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair that suggested he had last seen a proper grooming facility several months ago. His clothing was the standard jumpsuit favored by long-haul travelers, worn and patched in places, with the logo of some mining consortium that Krill didn't recognize. Nothing unusual. Humans had become relatively common in this sector over the past 50 years, ever since they had joined the broader galactic community and immediately started taking jobs that other species considered inadvisably dangerous, or essentially suicide with a paycheck. Identification, Krill said, his translator rendering the words in flat galactic standard. The human passed over his datapad without comment. Marcus Webb, according to the credentials, age 37 standard years, registered labor contractor, current employment with Helix Mining Corporation. Previous stops included a depressing list of stations in increasingly remote systems. Nothing remarkable. Krill had processed maybe 36 similar profiles, just this shift. "Step into the scanner, please." Marcus complied with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The quantum neural scanner hummed to life, its field washing over him in a cascade of invisible energy that mapped every cell, every atom, every quantum signature of his biological existence. The process took exactly 2.7 seconds, then every alarm in Checkpoint 7 began screaming. Not the polite chirping that indicated minor contraband or expired visas. Not the stern buzzing that suggested weapons or illegal substances. This was the sound that security personnel heard maybe twice in their entire careers, if they were unlucky. The critical threat klaxon, the one reserved for genocidal war criminals, plague carriers, and entities that posed existential risks to station integrity. Krill's 3 hearts all attempted to stop simultaneously. His fingers flew across his console, certain there had been a malfunction, but the scanner was operating perfectly. The database had cross-referenced Marcus Webb's biological signature and had returned a result that made Krill's anterior brain stem seriously consider early retirement. The holographic display materialized above the console in angry red text. Asterisk asterisk critical alert. Planet killer event survivor, detected asterisk 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 threat assessment level. 9 asterisk 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 psychological profile. Extreme trauma probability asterisk 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 recommended protocol. Immediate isolation and medical evaluation asterisk 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 documented survivors galactic-wide. 7 asterisk asterisk below the text. A 3-dimensional anatomical scan of Marcus Webb rotated slowly, and Krill felt his lunch threatening to make a reappearance. The human's chest was a roadmap of scar tissue, not the neat surgical lines of medical procedures, but the chaotic geography of catastrophic trauma. Burns that suggested exposure to radiation that should have been immediately fatal. Impact patterns consistent with being struck by debris at velocities that should have liquefied internal organs. Tissue damage that indicated vacuum exposure, extreme temperatures, and what the database helpfully noted as massive structural collapse injuries. Marcus stood in the scanner, looking bored. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone suggesting this was taking slightly longer than his preferred timeline. Krill couldn't speak. His translator was making confused buzzing sounds that matched his mental state. His finger found the emergency contact button and pressed it with the desperate energy of someone who had just realized he was dramatically underqualified for this situation. Vex'thor arrived at Checkpoint 7 approximately 45 seconds later, which was impressive considering he had been 3 levels away reviewing supply requisitions. He had learned long ago that when the critical threat klaxon sounded, you moved fast and asked questions while moving. His security team materialized behind him, weapons drawn but pointed safely at the floor, forming a perimeter that was professional and threatening in equal measure. "Report," Vex'thor commanded, his eyes already scanning the holographic display. Krill managed to produce sounds that were approximately language. "Sir, the human, the database, planet killer, 7 survivors, the scars, I don't breathe, Krill." Vex'thor's eyes fixed on the rotating anatomical scan, and his professional composure wavered for exactly 3 seconds before reasserting itself through sheer willpower and 30 years of training. "Seal the checkpoint, no one in or out. Contact medical, and have a trauma specialist standing by. And someone get me the full database report on what exactly we're dealing with." Marcus, still standing patiently in the scanner, raised one hand slightly. "Look, I've got a connecting flight in 2 hours, so if we could maybe expedite whatever this is." The casual tone coming from something the database had classified as a critical threat was deeply unsettling. Vex'thor had encountered planet killer event survivors exactly twice in his career. Once had been a Quellan elder who had lived through the Sigma collapse 300 years ago and still required psychological handlers and anti-anxiety medication measured in liters. The second had been a Vryn who had survived the Helios incident and couldn't be in the same room as Windows because the sight of open space triggered catatonic episodes. Both of them had the haunted, broken quality of beings who had stared into the cosmic abyss and had the abyss stare back with malicious intent. Both required special accommodations, gentle handling, and spaces designed to minimize psychological triggers. This human looked like he was annoyed about missing lunch. "Mr. Webb," Vex'thor said carefully, using the tone normally reserved for negotiating with armed hostage-takers, "I need you to remain calm. We've detected some anomalies in your biological signature that require investigation. This is standard protocol. No one is accusing you of anything." "Okay," Marcus said. "Can I remain calm outside the scanner? It's making my dental fillings buzz." The security database report materialized on Vex'thor's personal display, and he began reading with the growing horror of someone discovering that reality was significantly worse than initially suspected. Planet killer events were the galaxy's boogeyman, the disasters that orbital civilizations feared above all else. They were the cosmic catastrophes that sterilized worlds, rogue asteroids beyond deflection capacity, stellar radiation bursts, volcanic cascades, atmospheric ignition events, the kind of disasters that killed populations measured in billions and left survivors measured in dozens at best. The galactic protocols for planet killer events were exhaustive: immediate evacuation of surrounding space, quarantine of affected zones, massive relief efforts, and intensive, decades-long psychological treatment for the handful of survivors, because watching your entire world die tended to break sapient minds in fundamental and permanent ways. According to the database, Marcus Webb had been on Earth during an event classified as PK Class 7, the Vancouver incident. 17 years ago, the report noted that a rogue asteroid fragment, approximately 400 meters in diameter, had impacted the western coast of the North American continent after partial deflection efforts had failed. The impact had released energy equivalent to roughly 3,000 strategic nuclear devices. The city of Vancouver and surrounding regions had been effectively vaporized. Seismic shockwaves had triggered cascading geological events. The atmospheric disruption had caused climate anomalies for 2 years following the incident. Estimated casualties: 4 million dead or missing. Estimated survivors within the primary impact zone: 0. Except the database had footnoted that last number with an asterisk and a note that made Vex'thor's mandibles twitch involuntarily. Human resilience factors may produce statistical outliers. Marcus Webb had been in Vancouver. Had been, according to the detailed medical records the database was now helpfully providing, approximately kilometers from ground zero. Had survived the initial impact, the thermal pulse, the shock wave, the structural collapse of the building he had been inside, and had then proceeded to walk 15 miles through burning debris to reach an evacuation point, where he had politely informed the rescue workers that he felt a bit rough and could probably use some water. His injuries, as catalogued by the emergency medical teams, read like a creative writing exercise in catastrophic trauma. Third-degree burns across 60% of his body, collapsed lung, fractured ribs, shattered left arm, severe concussion, radiation exposure well beyond lethal thresholds for most species, and what the report described as generalized tissue damage consistent with being inside a building that experienced rapid, unplanned disassembly. He had spent 6 weeks in medical care and had been back at work within 3 months. "This can't be accurate," Vex'thor muttered, scrolling through the report. "The radiation exposure alone should have killed him," offered his second in command, a Drellian named Chicks, who had been reading over his shoulder. "The burns should have killed him. The impact trauma should have killed him. The vacuum exposure, when the building's pressure seals failed, should have definitely killed him. But here we are, and there he is, looking impatient about his connecting flight." Vex'thor made a decision that he would later describe as possibly the bravest moment of my career and approached the scanner. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to ask you to come with us to a secure interview room. This is not an arrest. We simply need to verify some information." Marcus shrugged and stepped out of the scanner. "Sure. But seriously, I've got that flight." The secure interview room was designed to make people feel simultaneously comfortable and aware that they were being very closely monitored. Soft lighting, ergonomic furniture that adjusted to 17 different physiological configurations, beverages available in 43 different chemical compositions, and cameras hidden so expertly that most species never realized they were being recorded from 9 different angles. Marcus accepted a coffee that the station synthesizer produced with the begrudging competence of a machine that resented making beverages for organic life forms. Vex'thor sat across from him, all 4 arms resting on the table in what he hoped was a non-threatening posture. Chick stood near the door, looking official and slightly nervous. Krill had been sent on mandatory break after developing what the medical team had diagnosed as acute existential anxiety, which was the Mytharian equivalent of needing to lie down in a dark room and question the nature of reality. Mr. Webb, Vex'thor began, our database indicates you were present on Earth during the Vancouver incident. Can you confirm this? Yeah, Marcus said, sipping his coffee and making a face that suggested the synthesizer's resentment had affected the flavor. I was there. The report suggests you were within the primary impact zone. 4 kilometers from ground zero, yeah. I was working construction on a residential tower. Vex'thor's translator made a sound that didn't have an equivalent in galactic standard, but roughly translated to the noise someone makes when their worldview cracks slightly. You survived being 4 kilometers from a 400-meter asteroid impact. Well, obviously, Marcus said, gesturing at himself with his coffee cup. I'm sitting here, aren't I? The database classifies this as a planet-killer event. Marcus paused mid-sip. A what? A planet-killer event. A PK Class 7 disaster, one of the most catastrophic classifications in galactic security protocols. The human looked genuinely confused. That seems a bit dramatic. I mean, yeah, it was bad. Vancouver got pretty much flattened, and the cleanup took years. But planet killer sounds like something that would, kill the planet. Earth's still there. Billions of people still on it. We rebuilt Vancouver. It's actually quite nice now, very modern. Good waterfront dining, though the waterfront is in a slightly different location than it used to be. Vex'thor felt his professional composure beginning to fray around the edges. Mr. Webb, 4 million casualties, atmospheric disruption, seismic cascades. These are planet killer indicators. Sure, by asteroid standards it was a rough Thursday, Marcus agreed, but calling it planet killer seems like great inflation. Now, the Yellowstone thing in 2186, that was genuinely concerning. Supervolcano almost went full eruption. Would have been a proper mess. But they managed to vent it safely, mostly, and only lost a few 100,000 people. Engineering triumph, really. Safely, Vex'thor repeated, his voice flat. A few 100,000 casualties is safe. Compared to the 2 billion that would have died otherwise. Yeah, relatively safe. Marcus set down his coffee cup. Look, is this going somewhere? Because I'm getting the feeling there's been some kind of miscommunication. Chick stepped forward, his scales rippling with an emotion that his species expressed through color changes and that roughly translated to profound disbelief mixed with the desire to laugh hysterically. Mr. Webb, the galaxy has documented 7 survivors of planet-killer events, 7 individuals across 400 years. They require extensive psychological support, specialized habitats, and constant medical monitoring. They are, universally, deeply traumatized by their experiences. You're sitting here complaining about coffee and worried about missing a flight to, he checked his datapad, the Therian mining colony, which our records indicate is located on a tectonically unstable moon, with regular seismic events and no atmosphere. It pays well, Marcus said defensively. And the instability is exactly why they need experienced workers. Someone's got to extract the iridium, and it might as well be someone who doesn't panic when the ground moves. Vex'thor accessed the database again, searching for additional information on human survival incidents. What he found made him seriously consider whether the database had developed a glitch or a sense of humor. The query returned 43 additional humans tagged with various survivor classifications. Not just Vancouver, there was someone who had survived the Yellowstone volcanic incident Marcus had mentioned. 3 individuals who had lived through what humans apparently called the Mumbai tsunami that had killed 8 million. A dozen survivors of something labeled the Australian firestorm cluster. Two people who had been in orbit during a solar radiation event that should have been instantly lethal. Each entry was tagged with medical reports that read like horror stories. Injuries that should have been fatal. Exposure to conditions that exceeded safe parameters by orders of magnitude. Recovery times that defied biological logic. Your species, Vex'thor said slowly, appears to have a very different definition of survivable than the rest of the galaxy. Marcus shrugged. Humans are pretty tough. We evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill us most of the time. Predators, diseases, weather, geological instability, each other. We got good at not dying. It's kind of our thing. The scars, Chick said. The burns, the impact trauma, the radiation damage. How are you even functional? Good medical care, physical therapy, and spite, mostly, Marcus said. The human body is remarkably good at healing if you give it time and proper nutrition. Plus, modern medicine is pretty fantastic. They grew me new skin, reinforced my skeletal structure, flushed the radiation. I was back at the gym within a year. The psychological trauma. Look, was it scary? Absolutely. Did I have nightmares for a while? Sure. Did I see a therapist? Yeah, for about 6 months. But life goes on. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to pay the bills or rebuild Vancouver. So I got back to work. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Is that what this is about? You're worried I'm some kind of ticking time bomb who's going to have a breakdown in your station. Vex'thor realized that was exactly what he had been worried about. The protocols for planet killer survivors emphasized extreme caution because the psychological damage was considered inevitable and profound. Survivors needed protected environments, careful monitoring, support structures. They didn't casually book flights to dangerous mining colonies and complain about coffee. Our protocols require evaluation of individuals who have experienced extreme trauma, Vex'thor said carefully. I'm fine, Marcus said, seriously. I passed all the psychological evaluations back home. I'm certified for high-stress work environments. I've got no outstanding medical issues. I'm just a guy trying to get to work, and you're making me late. The door to the interview room chimed, and a harried-looking Quellan administrator rushed in, datapad clutched in 3 of his 6 arms. Sir, we have a situation. Word has spread through the station that you're holding a planet-killer survivor in custody. We're receiving evacuation requests from 17 different passenger groups. The Vryn delegation is threatening diplomatic incidents. Someone started a rumor that he's contaminated with exotic radiation, and the Galactic Safety Administration is demanding to know why they weren't notified immediately about a PK survivor in transit. Vex'thor closed his eyes and contemplated the life choices that had led him to this moment. Inform the passengers that there is no danger. Contact the GSA and tell them we're conducting standard verification protocols. And find whoever started the radiation rumor and charge them with inciting panic. The administrator fled, with the desperate energy of someone who had already exceeded his stress quota for the day. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm causing quite a stir. You're the first planet-killer survivor most of these people have ever encountered. Vex'thor explained. They're scared. The protocols exist because PK survivors are considered extremely fragile and potentially unstable. That's kind of insulting, Marcus said mildly. I mean, I survived an asteroid impact. I'm clearly not that fragile. The logic was airtight and completely missed the point, which Vex'thor was beginning to realize was a very human trait. He accessed his communication system and requested a priority channel to the Galactic Safety Administration. The conversation that followed was professionally uncomfortable, with a GSA coordinator named Threll expressing profound disbelief that a PK survivor was being allowed to travel unescorted to a high-risk work environment. His psychological evaluations are current, Vex'thor reported, reading from Marcus's file. His medical clearances are valid. By our own regulations, we have no legal grounds to detain him. The regulations were written assuming PK survivors would need protection, Threll countered. Not that they would be voluntarily traveling to danger zones. Perhaps the regulations need updating. Perhaps humans need to be classified differently. That hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implications. The galaxy had categories for every species, their biological needs, their psychological profiles, their risk factors. Humans had been catalogued 50 years ago, based on limited interaction data. The classification had listed them as carbon-based, bilateral symmetry, moderate durability, and standard psychological resilience. The database was beginning to suggest that assessment might have been catastrophically optimistic. Marcus, oblivious to the bureaucratic crisis unfolding around him, had pulled a protein bar from his pocket and was eating it. The wrapper identified it as extreme nutrition, volcanic mint flavor, which sounded like something designed by and for people with questionable survival instincts. "Can I try that?" "Ah," Krill asked, having returned from his break and apparently decided that his day couldn't get worse. Marcus handed over half the bar. Krill took a small bite, and his face went through several colors that his species didn't normally produce. "What is in this?" "It tastes like chemical warfare. Protein, carbohydrates, synthetic vitamins, and probably some stuff that isn't technically legal in most systems," Marcus said cheerfully. "It's designed for extreme environments. Keeps you functional when regular food isn't available." "It's burning my tongue," Krill said, his voice slightly panicked. "Yeah, the spice content is pretty high. Supposed to keep your metabolism active in low-oxygen environments." Marcus took another bite of his half. "You get used to it." The medical team arrived approximately 3 minutes later to treat Krill for what they diagnosed as mild chemical exposure and poor decision-making. Marcus apologized and offered to pay for the medical expenses, which somehow made the situation worse because it implied this was a foreseeable consequence of sharing his snacks. Vex'thor made an executive decision. "Mr. Webb, you're free to go. We have no legal basis to detain you. However, I'm flagging your profile for future reference, and I'm recommending to the GSA that human resilience metrics be reassessed. I'm also strongly suggesting you reconsider your travel plans." "I appreciate the concern, but I'm good," Marcus said, standing and collecting his datapad. "The Therian job pays triple standard rates precisely because it's dangerous. I've got loans to pay off and retirement to plan for. Dangerous work now means comfortable life later. You survived a planet-killer event and your primary concern is retirement planning," Vex'thor said, not quite believing the words as he spoke them. "I'm 37. I've got maybe 30 more working years if I'm lucky. Compound interest doesn't wait for existential crises." Marcus headed toward the door, then paused. "Hey, sorry for the trouble. I know my file probably looks alarming. But humans are tougher than you think. We've survived a lot worse than asteroids." He left, and the interview room fell into stunned silence. Chick spoke first. "Did he just imply that asteroid impacts aren't particularly impressive by human standards?" "I think he did," Vex'thor said quietly. "Should we be worried about him?" "No. About the fact that there are apparently billions more like him on Earth, and they're spreading out into the galaxy." "Absolutely." The database chimed with an update. Another human had just entered Checkpoint 3. The scanner had flagged them with a different survival classification. Survived deep ocean pressure event. Mariana incident. The medical notes indicated the individual had been in a submarine when structural failure occurred at depths that should have been instantly fatal. They had survived 12 hours in a damaged vessel with failing life support before rescue. They were traveling to a deep-core mining operation on an ocean world. Vex'thor accessed the station's administrative systems and filed a formal request for hazard pay increase, citing expanding awareness of human durability creating philosophical distress among security personnel. He then opened a new file and began drafting a proposal to the Galactic Security Collective, suggesting that human resilience classifications be moved from standard to a new category he was tentatively calling aggressively implausible. Marcus Webb made his connecting flight with 17 minutes to spare. The vessel was a commercial hauler heading toward the outer mining colonies, packed with cargo and a mixed-species crew who gave him the wide-eyed stares that suggested word of the security incident had already spread. He found his assigned quarters, a small cabin that smelled faintly of recycled air and industrial lubricant, and settled in for the 3-day journey. His bunkmate was a Drellian engineer named Voss, who had apparently drawn the short straw in crew assignments. Voss entered the cabin, saw Marcus, and froze. "You're the planet killer's survivor," Voss said, his scales shifting to a nervous yellow. "I prefer asteroid incident survivor, but sure," Marcus said, unpacking his duffel bag. "They're saying you're dangerous, unstable, that you survived impossible trauma and might be psychologically damaged." Marcus pulled out a battered paperback book, actual paper because he liked the aesthetic, and settled onto his bunk. "I'm really not. I just want to work my contract, save some money, and maybe take a vacation somewhere with normal gravity and no geological instability." "You don't need to worry." Voss didn't look convinced, but took the opposite bunk. They traveled in silence for several hours before the Drellian's curiosity apparently overcame his nervousness. "What was it like? The impact?" Marcus considered the question. "Loud. Really, really loud. The building I was in basically ceased being a building and became airborne debris. Everything went sideways, literally. I remember thinking that my safety certification classes had definitely not covered this scenario. Then I woke up in a pile of rubble with a beam across my chest and my left arm bent in a direction arms don't usually bend. The sky was on fire. The ground was shaking. And I was alive, which seemed statistically improbable, but I wasn't going to argue with reality." "And you just walked out?" "Well, first I had to move the beam, which took a while because leverage is hard when you've only got one working arm. Then I had to find a route through the debris that didn't involve climbing over things that were currently exploding. Then I had to remember which direction was away from the impact zone, which was challenging because most of my navigational landmarks had been vaporized. But yeah, eventually I walked out. Took about 6 hours." Voss's scales had shifted to a pale blue that indicated profound confusion. "Most species would have died from shock. The pain alone." "Oh, the pain was incredible," Marcus agreed. "Like being on fire and crushed and electrocuted all at once. But dying wasn't going to make it hurt less, so I figured I might as well try surviving instead. Humans are pretty good at ignoring pain when the alternative is death. It's a useful evolutionary trait." "Your species is terrifying," Voss said quietly. "We're really not. We're just stubborn. There's a difference." Marcus opened his book. "Now if you don't mind, I'm going to read for a while. It's been a long day." Back on Zenith Trading Hub, Vex'thor was having a very long conversation with the Galactic Safety Administration about updating human classification protocols. The conversation was not going well, primarily because the GSA coordinator kept insisting that the data must be incorrect, and Vex'thor kept pointing out that the data was coming from the galaxy's most accurate security database, and from verified medical records provided by human authorities. 4 million casualties is not a bad Thursday, the coordinator insisted. "I'm just reporting what he said," Vex'thor replied tiredly. "Look, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I know trauma when I see it. This human had no indicators of psychological instability. He was calm, rational, and primarily concerned about making his connecting flight. Either he's the most functional survivor in galactic history, or humans process disaster trauma completely differently than every other known species. Or he's suppressing it, and will experience delayed breakdown." "That's possible," Vex'thor admitted. "But his records show he's been evaluated regularly for 17 years. Multiple therapists, medical professionals, psychological specialists, they all cleared him. At some point, we have to accept that maybe humans are just built different." The coordinator was quiet for a moment. "We're going to need to study this. If humans can survive planet killer events and remain functional, that changes a lot of assumptions about colonization risks, disaster response, and whether we should be worried about how many of them are spreading across the galaxy taking jobs that are supposed to be impossible." Vex'thor finished. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too." After the call ended, Vex'thor filed his report and went to the station's observation deck. He needed to look at the stars for a while and contemplate the implications of a species that treated extinction-level disasters as workplace incidents. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was traveling toward a volcanic moon to do dangerous work for good pay. Somewhere else, 43 other documented survivors were probably doing similar things. And on Earth, billions more humans were going about their lives on a planet that had tried very hard to kill them repeatedly and had failed every time. The galaxy, Vex'thor reflected, had spent 400 years assuming it understood the parameters of survival. That certain disasters were universally catastrophic. That certain traumas were inevitably breaking. That certain limits were absolute. And then humans had joined the galactic community and had immediately started proving those assumptions wrong, not through advanced technology or superior intellect, but through sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge that they should be dead. It was, he decided, either deeply inspiring or absolutely horrifying, possibly both. A maintenance worker drifted past the observation window, secured to the station's hull by magnetic boots, casually performing repairs in the vacuum of space. Vex'thor checked his database reflexively. Human, of course, the species that had evolved on a planet, trying to murder them, had apparently decided that the lack of atmosphere and lethal radiation of open space was just another workplace condition to adapt to. Vex'thor updated his personal log with a note that future security officers should be aware. When the database flags a human as a survivor of impossible circumstances, the correct response is not alarm, but rather a weary acceptance that this is apparently normal for them. He returned to his office, poured himself a drink that his species used for medicinal purposes and special occasions, and contemplated early retirement. He had 30 years of service. He had earned his pension. He had done his duty. And he had absolutely no desire to be working security the day humans decided that surviving planet killers wasn't impressive enough and started volunteering for something worse. The galaxy, he suspected, was about to get very interesting. And by interesting, he meant terrifying, but mostly interesting. His communicator chimed. Another human had just arrived at checkpoint 12. The database had flagged them as a survivor of something called the Chernobyl Heritage Incident, which his translator was struggling to process because apparently humans had named a disaster after a previous disaster from centuries ago, which suggested either a dark sense of humor or a concerning pattern. Vex'thor drained his drink, stood up, and went back to work. Someone had to keep the galaxy safe from humans, or possibly keep humans safe from the galaxy. He wasn't entirely sure which direction the protection needed to flow anymore. But either way, it was definitely going to require more coffee. And possibly a raise. Definitely a raise.